Welcome to the West Virginia Case Podcast, hosted by Les Odell. Join us as we dive deep into all things strange, including Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, and more. Pull up a chair and set for a spell. It's going to be a great time. Now, without further delay, let's get the show started.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey folks, welcome back to West Virginia Case Podcast. I just want to put out a little bit of a thank you here for our guest last week, Gwen Purcell. She did an awesome job, but she also invited me to speak at her event that was held this past weekend. It was the Central Pennsylvania Cryptid and Bigfoot Festival. Great turnout. Several vendors. Multiple vendors. I think it was between 100, 110 vendors, something like that. Quite a few people. A lot of people showed up. It was really awesome time. Got to meet a lot of awesome folks. Got hit with some rain at the end there. Kind of soaked everything out, but that was pretty close to the end, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But yeah, had a great time, and I want to thank Gwen for inviting me to do that, and can't wait to possibly be up there next year. And if you guys are in that area, which is Ellisburg, PA, check it out. Look it up on Facebook area. I forget what the date is already set for next year, but it's already set. But we'll move on now, and we have a pretty awesome guest here tonight. It's Mr. Jake Dressel. Jake is a researcher out of Ohio, out in the Dayton area. He's a Bigfoot researcher and an experiencer. He had an experience that you don't hear much about. It was pretty interesting. I talked to him earlier this week. It's pretty wild. Normally you hear certain things about these Bigfoot creatures, but his and his wife's encounter was different. Let's just say that. And I'll let him tell you about that and go into the detail. And he's got some things. We'll have some pictures to show here, and we'll just let him go into it, and we'll walk right into it. And without further ado, let's bring on Jake. Hey, Jake.
How you doing, Les?
Good, you?
Hello, everybody else out there. I'm doing great, man. Glad to be here with you.
So, as I do with everybody, I'd never really asked for a bio or anything like that. I usually rob one of your pictures off your Facebook for,
right.
for this little thumbnail. But I feel, I don't know. To me, it's more not entertaining, but engaging when the guest actually tells us about themselves. So yeah, if you want to, just you don't have to go into your encounter or your research. Just tell us about you, and I do know you have ties here in West Virginia, through your parents. So just if you want to go into stuff like that, for a brief moment, more welcome to hear it.
Absolutely. So my name is Jake Dressel. I'm from the Dayton, Ohio area. My parents moved up here from West Virginia when they got pregnant with me back in 81. And I grew up pretty much in the area my whole life. My mom's from Spencer, West Virginia. My dad's from Parkersburg. So I remember being a kid, we'd go back and visit family there and whatnot. I've been a hunter and a fisherman pretty much my whole life. Always been in the outdoors. I remember my dad showing me tracks when I was a little kid, and I don't claim to be an expert hunter or fisherman or anything like that. It's been something my family's always done, recreationally. But as an example, I don't ever remember not being able to tell the difference between a buck track and a doe track, for example. Or I'm very familiar with all the wildlife here in Southwest Ohio. Like I can tell you what a raccoon climbing a privacy fence looks like in the pitch black dark, just because I've seen so many raccoons and dealt with it so much, and chase them out of the trash cans and everything else, you know. So I'm very familiar with all the local wildlife in the Western Ohio area. I've kind of always had an interest in the paranormal and the unexplained ever since I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I found that first book in my school library that had a chapter on Bigfoot, a chapter on UFOs, a chapter on Atlantis, a chapter on DB Cooper, a chapter on crystal skulls and whatnot. So I remember reading a lot of that stuff growing up. I remember seeing Bob Lazar in his original interview when he's all blacked out, you know, on TV when I was a kid. My mom was always kind of somewhat interested in this stuff too. So, you know, she'd always watch Unsolved Mysteries and The Twilight Zone. And so I kind of grew up, you know, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and In Search of and things like that. UFOs were my original passion. The suburb I live in, Huber Heights, is right next door to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The house I grew up in is practically 5.5 miles down the road from the runway there at Wright-Pat. So, like I said, UFOs were always my original passion. Yeah, as I got older, you know, I turned 18 in 1999, and then, you know, technology advanced, and became a guy in my 20s, and kind of nothing really came out of UFOs. You never really got anywhere. So I kind of got disillusioned for a while, probably with that up until, you know, 2017 when the Navy started releasing the videos. I started taking more of an interest in the UFOs again. Like I said, that was my original passion. I mean, I remember my best friend and going to see Fire in the Sky when it was in movie theaters when I was, you know, 12 years old. And, you know, the fall of '93, the X-Files came out, and I was glued to the television on that. And, you know, then you had sightings and stuff like that afterwards. So, but my first encounter with something strange happened in the summer of 1993. And the house I grew up in, my best friend, he was a few years older than me. He was 15 or so. I was 12. My brother was 10 at the time. And he lived directly behind me, but off to the side. So my backyard, there is a neighbor that was directly behind him. And like the last quarter of our yard was like where his yard backed up. And he had a detached 2-car garage. And it was a little 3-foot chain link fence that separated our yard. So it was one of those things, we just climbed the fence when we were kids and go back and forth to each other's houses and stuff. And I remember there was one night that summer. My mom was going to Cincinnati which is about an hour south of Dayton, driving wise. And so she was going to be gone for the whole evening. If I remember correctly, the band might have even been Firehouse. But my buddy Jeff was staying the night with us. My mom was like, "Hey, you know, we're not going to be back till late. So if you could stay over here with them," because we grew up poor basically. So it wasn't uncommon for our phone to be disconnected and whatnot growing up. So Jeff stayed with us, and like I said, we were playing Sega Genesis or something, and I think we were going to go over to his house and get a game, and it could have been Mortal Kombat or Streets of Rage or something like that. And I told my brother, and this is 10 o'clock at night, so it's dark, and I told my brother, I said, "Hey, Josh, you stay here. Me and Jeff are going to go over and get this game." And my buddy Jeff, his dad, he was former Air Force. He worked out at Wright-Pat. Very anal guy, like you know, didn't leave, you know, Jeff wasn't allowed, he got chewed out if he left the lights on in the house, if he left the door open when the air conditioner was running, that kind of stuff. So we knew his dad was going to be down at the pub getting something to eat and having a couple drinks. So we knew his dad wasn't home. His truck wasn't in the driveway. So we climbed the fence. We go up the side of his garage. And if you want to bring up that first pic, kind of give you a visual there.
Yeah, give me a minute. I got to pull all that back up here real quick.
No problem, Les. So
yeah. Oh, you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Oh, I thought you froze. You like stopped
No,
moving.
I was
sorry.
So here we go. So the two blue X's on the screen. The top one is Jeff's house, and the second one is his detached garage, and then the red X is my house. Now, It looks like there's a small tree there now, but back in the 90s, there was a huge tree there that was probably similar in size. The canopy was to the one to the right of the red X. So that covered the whole backyard. So we had a porch light, and you got a little bit of light from that porch light, but underneath that tree, it was completely black. Well, we walked up the side to the right of the blue X. There's a little path there, and we get to where basically that RV is parked now. It was an empty driveway at the time, and we noticed that the garage door was raised up, which was completely odd because Jeff's dad didn't leave garage doors up. We also noticed that his back door was open, but the screen door was closed, and all the lights in the house were on, which was very, very strange for Jeff's dad. Jeff's dad didn't do that stuff. We were like, oh, so us being 12 and 15, and we're like, hey man, maybe somebody broke into your house. So we walked back around to the other side of we walked back up the path and go to the far side of his detached garage, thinking that if we come around the other side, we can maybe see through the bay window and see if there's anybody in the house. We're these kids, we're going to try to catch this bird that's in his house or whatever. Well, when we get to the edge of the back side of the garage, I see movement out of the corner of my eye, and I hear the chain link fence rattle. And I turn and I was like, dang it, Josh, because I was going to say, I told you to stay up on the porch. Me and Jeff were going to go. And when Jeff and I turned, there was this it looked completely black from the available light that I had, but it was extremely dark, humanoid figure, 3.5 feet tall. And it was crouched on top of the chain link fence. And I could see a side profile of it. I could see its knees jutted forward, and it sat there for a moment. And I can't tell you how long. It seemed like forever. You know how things go when they're in slow motion like that, and you get that adrenaline dump. Well, while I'm looking at this, I can also see my brother he's hanging out the back screen door of our house under the light. So I know this isn't my brother. And, I'm looking at this thing. Jeff's looking at this thing. My brother's looking at this thing. Well, it jumps off the fence. It does a very good job of staying in the shadows the entire time, so it never steps into any light. And I can't tell you if it was hairy. I can't tell you if it was smooth skinned. All I can tell you is that it appeared to be a 3.5 foot tall humanoid. It ran on two legs, and it was a solid black figure, and scared the piss out of us. We're 12, 15. My brother's 10, so we're scared to death. We're like, what in the heck is that? Never really figured anything out. And this is, like I said, this is 93. This is pre-internet. This is, I'd never heard of the Minerva monster at this point. I'd never heard of the grass man. If Bigfoot existed, it was something that was out in the Pacific Northwest, or, maybe in Florida, the skunk ape. But I was not familiar with anything Bigfoot-like here in Ohio. So that was my first experience with something strange. And, any questions, Les?
No.
Okay. I thought you were getting ready to say something. Sorry. So that was my first encounter with anything strange. And, it was one of those things as years went on, it never left me. And, there were various times I was like, was it one of these shadow people that people talk about? Because I'd never connected it with any type of, hominid type creature. And so for years, I just I let it go. And then I didn't really think much of it as I got older. And then, fast forward to 2016, my wife and my daughter talked me into getting a dog, and he was a rescue. He's about 1 year and 10 months old when we got him. And he's a Australian cattle dog pointer mix, very high energy dog. And my daughter had just started kindergarten that year. And at the time, my father-in-law lived about a 5-minute drive around the corner from us. And so we would drop my daughter off and the dog at my father-in-law and my mother-in-law's house, and they had just gotten a puppy, so they'd let the dogs play all day. So this went on for about 2 months, and then they're like, hey, look, you guys start keeping the dog at your house because we're going to fix the house up because we want to move out and get some land. I'm like, all right, cool. So I'm like, I don't want to leave this dog crated up all day. So I normally get up at 5 a.m. at that point to be at work at 6 a.m. And so I was like, I'll just get up a half hour earlier, start walking him in the morning. So first week goes by, I get up. I think I walked the dog Monday and Wednesday. My wife walks the dog Tuesday and Thursday. Friday, we may have flipped a coin. I don't remember who walked the dog on Friday. Monday is October the 3rd, 2016. And I get up, I walk out the front door of my house. My house is on a hill. So if you want to pull up that second picture, this should help some of the viewers. So my house is the house behind the pine tree, and the yellow line is the path I took leaving my house. Now, bear in mind, it's 4:30 in the morning. Across the street behind me is a street lamp. So I come out my screen door, I walk down my driveway, I come down the sidewalk, and that first yellow X in front of the pine tree right there, my dog lunges at the pine tree. So he'd already been sprayed by a skunk twice since we've gotten him. So I was like, oh man, I don't want to deal with him getting sprayed by a skunk. So out of curiosity, I was like, let me see what's back there or see if anything comes out, because if there's a skunk there, I want to make sure I don't walk this way on the way home. So I walk up the driveway, and the second X right there is about where I was standing. Well, the red dot behind the pine tree, I look, and this small dark figure is crouched down. Well, as soon as I get up close, this creature stands up. I'm a shade under 6 foot. I'm like 5'11 and a half, 5'11, 5'8", and I would say it was about waist high to me. So 3.5 feet tall. It walks up the hill, which the red line is the path this creature took. It walks up the hill, and when it gets to that tree, it raises its arm up and puts it on the tree as if it's steadying itself like a person would if it walked uphill. It walks along my house, and we had a privacy fence. My neighbor didn't. And there's a bunch of honeysuckle and brush and overgrowth on the neighbor's property, and it disappeared into that. And I'm left stunned, and I'm literally thinking to myself, I'm not really seeing this. It was one of those things where it was like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Like, I didn't believe what I was seeing. And the best way, I didn't smell anything, and I don't remember hearing anything. The best way I can describe it is it's like the first time you were in a fist fight when you were a kid. You got tunnel vision, and you don't remember hearing anything. You just remember seeing what was in front of you, And the oddest part about this was my dog, when he saw it, he pointed. Like, he was still as glass, head forward, paw up, and I've never seen him react that way to a raccoon, to we're out walking in the morning. If he sees a raccoon or a skunk or a cat, like, he'll bite at the leash. Like, he wants to get a hold of that critter. He was just like statuesque the whole time this thing was in front of us. I stand there for a few minutes, collect myself, finish walking the dog. I walk back by that pine tree. I stand there for a minute, and I'm like, did I really see that? Like, 25, 30 minutes have gone by. I go in, I get ready for work. I go about my day. I do not tell my wife about this. I want to be clear about that. She had no idea I saw this, because I figured if I told her this, because she's not really into this kind of stuff. I figured if I tell her this, she's gonna be like, you watch too much Monster Quest, you're imagining things. So I kept it to myself. So 24 hours later, Tuesday, October 4th, she's up walking the dog. And I'm in my garage getting the dog's food ready, and I hear my wife and the dog come through the door. And she walks in, and she is visually upset. Like, she's flushed. I'm like, what is wrong? And she's like, I was thinking maybe some weirdo was out messing with her while she's walking the dog or whatever. And she's like, what do we have around here that's like, 3.5 feet tall, that's hairy, that walks on 2 legs? And I'm like, did you see a raccoon? She's like, no, this didn't have a tail. Did you see a possum? No, I'm telling you, this didn't have a tail. I was like, crap, I really did see this thing. I was like, I saw it yesterday out in the front yard behind the pine tree. And she's like, what? And if you bring up the third picture I sent to you, the blue dot is about where I saw it, and the red dot is where she saw it the following day. And you can see that's a little less than a third of them. I mean, it's a 5-minute walk away. And so the best I could figure is when I saw the creature Monday morning and it disappeared into the brush, it went into that little wooded patch behind our house where this like 5-acre Montessori school is. And I'm thinking maybe it was hiding out. And then when my wife saw it, it was trying to head west back towards the Great Miami River. That's kind of what I figured out. But that's how close our sightings were 24 hours apart. I mean, dang near a stone's throw, you know. So I go to work that day. I spend the entire day on YouTube looking up videos of raccoons walking on two legs, possums walking on two legs, like anything I could think of. I even pulled up some, bear cubs or whatever else, and nothing looked like this thing. And the best way I could describe it is it was like the color of a cottontail rabbit. So it was a brownish gray. So, and like I said, I had a good light behind me. My wife, she sketched out what she saw, and it basically matched visually what I had seen. So after we both spent a bunch of time trying to debunk our own sighting, that was the first thing I did. Is like, what could this be that we have around here that, would be doing this? And the dog's important because, one, he's the only thing that's seen it twice. And two, like I said, this is not even 2 weeks of us walking our dog. Like my wife takes a different route than I do. I, at this point, was walking my dog. It took me probably a month or two to figure out what the best route was in the morning for me to get my dog walked about 1.5 miles and get home the quickest, because I was trying to be efficient. So my point is that nobody could have patterned me at this point, like now for the last 6 years, I take the same route every morning. So that's why I want to say, like, I don't think somebody patterned me or was playing a prank on me. Like, this wasn't a midget in a Bigfoot costume. This wasn't like, I don't believe this was a child in a costume at 4:30 in the morning. So, but it almost looked like an Ewok, but it was, like I said, it was the color of a cottontail rabbit. So it was that brownish gray color. And that matters because I've never seen a monkey costume or gorilla costume or Bigfoot costume that was that color. So finally, when me and my wife got to the point where we couldn't figure out, where we determined it wasn't anything that we have here and we didn't know what to do, I reached out to Ken Gerhardt through Facebook, and he took our report, and he told me that he has accumulated several reports around the country of these smaller Bigfoot type creatures. And most of the people describe them as being very fluid. And that's the thing about this creature. It did not run, and it moved very smoothly. Unlike, my son's 6, he's clumsy when he's running. When you look at videos of juvenile chimps or juvenile gorillas, they're clumsy and skinny. And most of the juvenile Bigfoot reports that I've read about, these things tend to be skinny and smaller. And this thing looked bulky and thick. And if you want to bring up those sketches my wife did to kind of give the viewers that was the first sketch. So 3.5 foot tall. You can scroll over to the next one. That kind of gives you a better. That is almost dead on the shape of the creature that I saw. I never saw the front of it. It never turned and looked at me. And looking back, I really believe that it was trying to get away from my dog. And when my wife saw it the next morning, she had told me that because she jogs the dog, I walk. I'm not about all that running stuff. But yeah, so these are my wife's sketches, and it was, like I said, it was very, very bulky, and it was very smooth, and it almost looked like a 3.5 foot tall version of what you see in the Patterson-Gimlin footage, except for it never turned to look at me. That's the best way I could describe it. And so Ken took my report. From there, I didn't really know what to do with any of this stuff. I had this experience, and then I think about 2 years went by, and Shannon LeGros from Into the Fray reached out to me. And before that, Ken Gerhardt had reached out to me again 2 years later and asked if he could include mine and my wife's encounter in his book. His Essential Guide to Bigfoot book that he was writing. And I said, absolutely, go ahead and include our encounter. I told him he could use any of the sketches that my wife had made. So he included those in his book. And then he was in Toledo in 2019 for the Toledo Paranormal Conference, and I'd never been to any of these cons or any of that stuff at this point. And I was like, yeah, that's a little over 2 hour drive from us. And I'm like, hey, let's go up here and talk to Ken. So I go up there, I meet Ken, talk to him. So when I get back, I'm kind of like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna get on Facebook and get into some of these paranormal groups and see if anybody else has seen anything like I've seen. So I found Shannon LeGros Into the Fray Facebook page and started asking questions. And then, God bless her soul, she was like an attack dog. She's like, "You want to come on my podcast?" And I'm like, I didn't listen to podcasts at this point. They just weren't my thing. I was kind of a late adopter to podcast. And then, so over the next, about next year and a half, she would probably about once a month or so, she would reach out and say, "Hey, you and your wife ever reconsider coming on?" And my wife's finally like, "You just want to do this lady's podcast just to kind of get her out of our hair?" And I'm like, all right, let me listen to her podcast just to kind of see what she's about. So listened to a few episodes, and then finally I was like, all right, we'll do her podcast. So we go on her podcast. We tell her story, or our story. And in the podcast, my wife, and I don't know why I didn't make this connection. My wife had asked me, she goes, "Hey, do you think that thing that you saw when you were a kid could be the same thing or the same type of thing that we saw?" And I was like a light bulb clicked in my head, and I was like, I guess I didn't get a good, and I want to be clear, I did not get a clear look at whatever I saw when I was 12. I just saw a humanoid figure, and it was too dark to see any details. So I still kind of put an asterisk by that, and I don't really marry those two together. However, after Shannon's podcast aired, a guy from our town emailed Shannon and said, back in 1993, after he'd graduated high school, there's an area at Huber that anybody in our area would know. It's called the Duck Pond, and it's 2 or 3 miles away from where I grew up. And he said, there's a little wood patch at the back of this pond, and him and his buddies go back there and smoke cigarettes and hang out, be teenagers back there. And he's like, that summer we were out there smoking cigarettes, and we ran into this, what he called a 3-foot tall mini Bigfoot looking creature. And I was like, holy cow, that's the same time frame that I saw that thing when I was a kid. And if you pull up the second map, not the one with the 37 minutes, but the one with the line. So the duck pond's at the very top of the screen, and there's a wooded patch right there. That yellow line traces a drainage creek that goes from that pond all the way to the Great Miami River. And the red dot right there is the house I grew up in. So you can see how close the creek comes to my house that I was in when I was a kid. And that's a 5-minute walk from my house, where my buddy Jeff and me and my brother saw that thing back in 93. So that was kind of like, hey, maybe there is something going on around here. And so now I've got 3 encounters, if you count what we saw in 93. I've got a corroborating encounter from 2.5 miles away along the same creek, basically. And then I've got, what me and my wife saw, which I think it's reasonable to assume that whatever I saw was the same thing my wife saw 24 hours later. So that kind of, after I went on to the podcast in 21, it really got me into this investigative researching kick. And I just was like, now I'm like a dog with a bone. I can't let it go at this point. And since then, I've, combed the BFRO records. I've been on the Bigfoot mapping project, and I've reached out to some of these witnesses, and I've collected several more reports in the greater northern Dayton area of these smaller 3 to 5 feet tall, hairy, mini Bigfoot looking creatures. I was telling one of my best friends now, I was telling him about my sighting, and then he was telling his wife about it, and he's like, you know what? His wife was like, you know what? My brother swears up and down that he saw this little hairy man covered from head to toe out in the field behind our house when we were kids. And I was like, well, when was this? And he goes, I don't know, sometime back in the 90s. And that field that he saw that little hairy man in is literally 2/3 of a mile away from the duck pond. So there's another account that's kind of corroborating in the same time frame. And I reached out to this lady. There's a lady in I believe it's 2000 was the year. She there's a suburb that's a little north of Dayton, about 9 miles up I-75, called Tip City, and the Great Miami River runs right through it. And her and her 2 children had an encounter. They were out along the creek bank in the woods, and they got chased out of the woods. And she said the best person that got a look at it was her son, and her son said it was as tall as his 10-year-old sister. It had a pointy head, and they heard whistling, and it was shaking a tree, and it kind of chased them out of the woods. So, I mean, I don't know what the average height of a 10-year-old girl is, but that sounds like a smaller, smaller type, hairy hominid type creature. And then I've collected another report from a metro park in our area called Carriage Hill. A lot of people don't know there's a hidden third pond back there where a guy reported seeing what he said was like a 4.5 foot tall hairy creature playing in the pond with his dad. And this was, I believe that was in 2011 when they saw that. And then in 2016 is when me and my wife have our encounter. And then in 2019, excuse me, the furthest account that I have out is there's Springfield is about 20 miles east of us, but a dad and his son were fishing in a place called Buck Creek, and Buck Creek drains into the Mad River, and the Mad River meets the Great Miami River right down in downtown Dayton. And he said him and his dad were fishing, and they saw 2 4-foot tall hairy creatures. They heard the noise first. They looked over, and they saw these 2 creatures crossing the creek, and they intentionally sat back to wait and see because they expected a bigger creature to come out behind it. And they never saw a bigger creature, but they saw a pair of these 2 4-foot creatures. Well, I was telling another buddy of mine, I was at a Dayton's Comic-Con they had a few years back, and I was telling another buddy of mine about this, and he's like, you know what? He was a few years older than me. I think he's about 6 years older than me, but he was like, when I used to play in a band back in the 90s, me and a bandmate of mine were hanging out, and we were kind of talking about the paranormal or whatever after band practice one night, and he told me that there was this one time his buddy took him out to this place. And this guy's kind of squirrely. I've been trying to track him down and talk to him face to face, but my buddy Kevin was like, yeah, this guy gets on Facebook like once a year. Like he's hard to run down. So I'm trying to follow up on this one, but he said that a friend of his took him out to this place that, teenagers go drink beer, smoke cigarettes, whatever. And that his buddy would sometimes be able to throw an apple or a candy bar out and something. And this little hairy thing would climb down out of the trees and take the candy bar or take the apple and then run back off into the woods. And so this guy told my buddy Kevin, he was like, yeah, my buddy took me out there 2 or 3 times. I never saw anything. And then he goes, I'll be damned if one time he threw a candy bar out there, whistled, and this thing came climbing down the trees, snatched the candy bar up and ran off. So that's kind of like where I'm at and what's kind of really ignited my research in this area with these smaller, hairy hominid creatures. And I seem to have a cluster around here that the only thing that I've been able to find to compare it to is the alba twitch out of Pennsylvania, south of Hershey, PA. I believe it's Carlisle, Pennsylvania is the area.
Yeah, I think York or York County, something like that, somewhere in that area.
Yeah, I know that the town starts with a C. I know it's south of Hershey, PA. I believe it's Carlisle. I could be wrong on that,
yeah.
But
yeah,
I think it's Carlisle. But that's the only other place where I've heard of that has another cluster of these smaller, hairy Bigfoot type creatures. And go ahead.
One question. I don't know if I might have missed it if you said it. There were 1993 sighting and the one you had in 2016. What was the distance between those two?
So I was probably 15, 20 feet away from. Oh, what was the distance like house
between the two?
wise?
Yeah, yeah.
2 mile, mile and a half, 2 miles.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I never planned for this to happen, but I've never really moved out of my hometown. So when me and my wife got together back in 2014, she just happened to already own a house that was a mile and a half, 2 miles away from the house I grew up in. I still on the weekends I'll walk my dog over by the house I grew up in sometimes. But yeah, it changed me to the point where like I don't leave my house in the morning to walk my dog without pulling up the camera on my phone now. I always carry a flashlight in my pocket. You know, I have a Streamlight 1 AAA 115 lumen flashlight. I always carry a spare battery in my pocket, and just to be prepared, because I noticed that, look, I didn't take a picture, and it's like, well, I was stunned. First of all, like it was one of those things where I was kind of, I wouldn't say I was in shock, but I was completely not prepared to see what I saw, if that makes sense. Like, you know, it's like I was so busy trying to figure out what I was seeing that like grabbing my phone never crossed my mind. So, but yeah, these, like I said, most of these are all within a 10-mile radius. Several of them are like within a 5-mile radius. And then my furthest outliers are about 20 miles away from here. But when you look on a map and plot them all out, they are all either along a major river or a creek that goes into a major. They're all near waterways.
Mm-hmm.
So my best guess is that they're using the waterways to travel like other wildlife does. And you know, at first, me being in the suburbs, I was like, what in the heck would this thing even be doing here? But you know, I've seen coyotes in the neighborhood when I'm walking my dog. I've seen the neighbor lady where my wife had her encounter around the corner. I was asking her if she'd seen anything weird in the neighborhood, and she told me that she's seen deer in the neighborhood a couple times. A couple of the other neighbors have seen deer in the neighborhood. And there's like I said, the Great Miami River is like, as a crow flies, a mile and a half due west of me. And like when you go through my plat and get to the main road, like there's a field there that you see coyotes and deer standing all the time. So it's one of those things that my best guess is maybe something wandered up into the neighborhood from the river, just like these deer and coyote and other wildlife do. So that's like kind of like my best working hypothesis at the moment. I don't know if these things are their own little hominid, or I don't know if they're juvenile Bigfoot. My biggest thing against them being juvenile Bigfoot is I don't have a corroborating large Bigfoot sighting. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that they're not there. But it just seems like an odd thing that over roughly a 30-year time frame, you'd have a cluster in this area of about 9 different sightings of these smaller hairy hominids. And we do have a couple larger Bigfoot sightings in the area, but you don't have like a little Bigfoot was seen in April, and then a large one was seen in July. And one could reasonably make the assumption that that was a mother and child, and you just saw one and not the other. I don't really have that overlap or anything like that with those kinds of encounters in this area.
What about physical evidence? Have you found much of that in your research?
Okay, I have not found any physical evidence. The next day, I did go back by the pine tree, and they didn't leave any prints or not. Now, this is the kind of thing that for a while I was really on that these were probably their own little thing. And then in August of 2022, me, my wife, and my dog, and my son, who was 4 at the time, we decided to go hike this Carriage Hill Metro Park, and we had a pretty big drought that year. There's a big they call it a lake, but it's actually just a big pond in the front. And I was trying to show him deer tracks and raccoon tracks and other things like that my dad showed me when I was a kid. And I took him up to the bank, and the ground's just so hard there were no tracks. So there's a second pond on the walking trail. So I'm like, yeah, so me, my wife, and dog and kid, we hiked back there, and we got to the second pond, and I was kind of amazed at how far down the water level was. And we come to the back side of it, and there's a bridge there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to climb down off this bridge and see if there's any deer tracks in here. And I did find a couple doe tracks in there. And then I was looking around, and then that's when I stumbled upon these 13-inch, what appeared to be human-like footprints. And you can pull those up if you want, Les, to show. Yeah, so that was these. There were about 5 tracks total. That was one of them. It's about 13 inches long. And then the second one is probably the best one I have. That was also 13 inches long and about 6 inches at the back. Like I said, they were in an area that is normally underwater, but the water in the pond, the water level was so low, and I was down in those tracks. There were no tread marks, no tread pattern from any tennis shoe, from anything like that at all. And when I got down in there, you could see that nobody else had stepped into that area. That mud was fresh. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, am I crazy? I mean, could this be like a Bigfoot track? So I take a picture of it. My wife's like, yeah, because she stayed on the bridge. She's like, yeah, you're crazy. Come on, let's go. The dog wants out of here. The kid's tired of walking. I'm like, no, look at this. I took a picture of it, showed her. She's like, holy crap. So she gets down there and looks at it. And she's like, what do we do? And I'm like, I'm going to send these to my dad and see what he thinks. Like, my dad's also been a lifelong hunter, fisherman, grew up in West Virginia, knows what bear tracks look like. So I sent them to my dad, and he's not really into this stuff. And he was like, oh, that's nothing. He kind of blew me off. And I was like, so the next morning I drugged my dad out there, and he's standing there and he's looking at him for a long time. And I'm like, what do you think, Dad? And he's like, well, I can see where you and your wife were stepping around here. I can see the tread pattern from your tennis, because I had a pair of Adidas trail running shoes on, and my wife, I think she just had a regular pair of tennis shoes on. She goes, I can see everywhere you guys stepped, and I can see there's only 2 tread patterns. This is my size 11 Adidas trail running shoe, right next to the first track you brought up. So at the time I was about 200 pounds, and I intentionally stood on one leg. So you can see how much deeper those other 2 prints are compared to my 200-pound body standing on one leg. Just the depth was tremendously different. And my dad's like, you know what? He's like, I don't know what this is, but this is the closest that I've ever seen in person to anything that looked like a track or a cast that I saw on a television program or seen in a book or anything like that. So that kind of was like, and the reason those prints stood out to me was because, I don't know, not far from there was the 2011 report of the 4-foot hairy creature that the father and the son saw at the 3rd pond in the back of this park. So that was the reason why I was like, there is a previous report from this area. So now I'm kind of like, are these juvenile Bigfoot? Is this an area where larger ones feel comfortable bringing their young? So that's kind of one of the things that kind of, I don't want to say monkey wrenched it, but like I said, I don't like to marry myself to ideas. So I'm open to the possibility that these are juveniles. But I'm really perplexed at why there are so many small 3 to 4.5 foot tall sightings in this area, and especially persistently over time. You know what I mean? And then, like I said, I've spent so many hours in the Bigfoot mapping project trying to find other clusters, and I don't find any clusters of smaller like sightings of small individuals. Like you get that occasional report of, a big one with a little one, but these are all accounts of small ones without a little, without a big one anywhere in the area, or even a big one sighted in the time frame that they are found in. So that's what really kind of got me going into investigating and researching. And I don't look at anything the same when I'm sitting in my deer stand anymore. I try to get out and hike, and I try to talk to people, and it's just one of those things. It's like, when it comes up in conversation, when you're having a beer, like, hey, you ever see anything strange when you're out? Talk to my buddies that are truck drivers, or, I'm always trying to, that's the reason I started going to these conventions and started talking to guys who have podcasts. And, in 2021, I think I went to Crypticon. That was like the first real big convention I went to. And, I was like, hey, maybe somebody else has heard of something like this. Yeah. it actually wasn't until last year at the Ohio Bigfoot Festival in Hocking Hills that I talked to Doug Waller. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Oh yeah.
He's real big in South. I talked to him, and he showed me several reports of some smaller type Bigfoot creatures that the one that stood out to me the most was these kids were talking about playing with a smaller one, and they described it as brindle colored. And I had never thought of a cottontail rabbit as being brindle colored, because you always think of dogs like boxers or pit bulls or something when you think of brindle. And I started looking at brindle animals, and I was like, instead of just brindle dog in Google Images, and you're like, holy cow, I could see where somebody could describe something that was, shaded like a cottontail rabbit, brownish gray or whatever, as being brindle. And that one really kind of stood out to me as a kind of like a, but he also has taken several reports in the southeast area of some smaller ones without larger Bigfoots with them, like maybe these are some smaller hominids or whatnot. So that's kind of what really has gotten me, into this stuff and kind of, plowing ahead. And, I've reached out to you, I think, in the past and asked you if you've taken any reports like this. And I was talking to Martin Groves at Monster Fest back in June, and he was telling me that he's got one area of the land between the lakes that consistently produces reports of a smaller 3 to 4 foot tall Bigfoot-like creature as well.
In your research and looking into the reports in your area, I'm assuming that you found other reports of larger ones. What would the percentage be? What's the percentage of large to the small ones that would you say you?
I've got probably 3 to 1. So
to the small side?
To the small side, yeah.
Okay.
So there are a couple larger ones in the area. I can think of one that was really close to the Great Miami River. I'll have to look up the year of that. That's on the BFRO. There are a couple a little north of me. But so far I'm up to 8, 9 on the small ones and 3 to 4 on the big ones.
Okay. We got a question here from Danny. Have you casted any small tracks? Have you casted any tracks?
I have not casted. I have not seen any small tracks. The problem with the small tracks is they're so easy to dismiss as tracks of kids or smaller humans. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I got a report from a friend of mine up pretty far north of me, outside of Findlay, Ohio. It's about an hour and a half drive for me, in a marsh up in that area, where she kept hearing stories of a smaller Bigfoot type creature. And I actually went up there with Justin and Jay from Cryptids of the Corn, and we checked the area out. And we found we did find some smaller, interesting tracks that were about 8 inches long by 4 inches wide. There was one track that maybe had toes, but it's one of those things that, like, if I looked at it, and I wanted to see toes, I could see toes, but we didn't cast anything because nothing really stood out. And the lady that had her sighting in 2000 actually lives at the north end of Huber Heights. The one that was chased out, her daughter and her son were chased out, and the kid described it as tall as his 10-year-old sister. I talked to this lady, and she told me that she would routinely find, because where she lived, her house butted up to the very edge of the county line. And at that time, it was all just woods and cornfields and farmland to the north of us. Over the last 15 years, that area has since been developed. But she said that she would always find it odd, because in the wintertime, which it gets pretty cold here in Dayton in December, January, February, and she would routinely find out back in that field, if she was out there, small barefooted tracks out there. And she goes, I can't figure out why. And the neighborhood that she lived in was, at that time, was the affluent area of Huber Heights. That's where all the new home construction was. It's hard to imagine there's any kids running out around barefoot in December and January in that area. So that's the hardest thing about the smaller tracks, is they're so easy to dismiss as kids or, a smaller person and whatnot. So I have not casted any of those.
Just for the clear something up, maybe some people are thinking is there a bear population at all in your area? I'm assuming probably not, but
No, we have no black bears in the area. There, about 5 years ago, there was a young bear that was spotted 30 miles south of me. But the metro parks and the ODNR were keeping an eye on it. But I mean, there's effectively no bear population in our area.
we got a question here for you. Hey Jake, would you say the creatures you saw could be similar to the apple devil or apple picker creatures?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a strong possibility. I believe they call it the Alba Twitch out there in Pennsylvania, which I believe is kind of a bastardization of apple snitch
Yeah.
from the research I've done. But that's, like I said, that's the only other area that I've heard of a cluster of smaller, hairy hominid type sightings. And it led me kind of down a rabbit hole. Like, most people don't realize there's a ton of fossil now, obviously not in North America, but like when you look at Australopithecus, Homo nadeli, Homo habilis, you have Homo floresiensis, like you have reports of the orang pendek. You actually have a lot of fossil evidence for smaller hominids throughout the fossil record. And another thing I wanted to bring up is, if anybody's done any yowie research out of Australia, the Aborigines there report a big yowie and a small yowie. And they say they're two different types of creatures. And then you get to the Himalayas where the Yetis are at. There are three types of Yeti that are reported. There are these 3 to 5 foot type Yetis. There are these 6 to 7 foot Bigfoot type Yetis. And then there's a larger one that most researchers think is some type of bear. So if you throw out the bear, you've got a big one and a small one in the Himalayas. You have a big one and a small one in Australia. And then when you get to Alaska, you have large Bigfoots, and then you have tails of what they call the hairy dwarves in Alaska. Something odd happens in the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast. I've never come across any type of accounts of smaller hairy hominids on the West Coast. But when you get into Mexico and South America, you have reports of hairy dwarves or the duendes down there as well.
Mothman 46 puts on here. I know I've heard stories about these in Ohio. The devil monkey. What's your feeling on that?
Very possible. Very possible. I've heard a couple of these devil monkey type tales. I know that what I saw. So you start throwing around like hominid, ape. Like, this thing did not have a tail, and I'd have to go double check on the devil monkey stuff. I don't know if they're reported as having tails or not, but this definitely was not a monkey because it did not have a tail. And I got a clear view of the backside of it.
Okay. What do I want to ask you? Oh, okay. We've talked about all that, but one thing I wanted to pop in there earlier and ask you, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sorry.
You said your mom was into had an interest in all this, and you said she's from Spencer, West Virginia, and
Correct.
I have a friend that lives in Spencer. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in Spencer. And there's been UFO sightings in Spencer. There's been Bigfoot sightings around the Spencer area. Has she ever mentioned anything of either one of those to you, or?
So my mom moved. So I think it was my mom's freshman year in high school. They moved from Spencer to Parkersburg. So it was one of those things where, like, when they moved to Parkersburg, she met my dad when she was a senior in high school. They got pregnant, and then once she moved up, she moved up here, and she actually graduated from high school up here. She's never mentioned. It's funny you mentioned that, because this is kind of what ties into my 93 sighting. I never told my mom about what me and my brother saw and my friend Jeff until I was 18 or 19 years old, and I was having a conversation with my mom, and she was telling me how when her and my dad first moved up here from West Virginia, they were staying with my Aunt Nancy, and they were all sitting around having a conversation about, the Bible, God, the devil, and all that stuff. And she was like, for some reason we stopped because they lived in a townhouse, and they looked over towards the front door of the townhouse, and my mom said there was this short, 3 foot tall, solid black figure. Like she said, she described it as like a shadow, but solid. And it walked up the stairs, and she said my dad went up and walked up after it. And when he said he couldn't find anything up there. So that was one of those things that kind of made me think that what I saw in 93, because I didn't get a good look at it because it was so dark, that I was like, maybe. And like I said, at that point, this is what I like to call pre-internet, because still, and I've always been a late adopter of technology. Like I think most people don't realize the internet, as you know today, didn't really exist until about 2005 when high-speed internet came out. Most people don't forget about the days where it was like, hey, get off the computer because I'm waiting for a call from your grandma or something. You know what I mean? So like we didn't have a computer in my home growing up. So other than the stuff that you would read in books. So that's what took me so long to put these two things together. And it's funny because after I went on that first podcast with Shannon, I sent it to my brother and had him listen to it. And my brother stopped before he even got to the part where my wife asked me about, those two things being the same thing. My brother was like, hey dude, I'm listening to this podcast. And he goes, this sounds like that thing that we saw when we were kids. Like as soon as my brother heard small hairy, like he was like, that reminds me of what we saw when we were kids. Like he put it together right away. It was the first, and I was like, I guess I had read so much other stuff that I kind of talked to I'd never considered that it was like, there would be something like this in our area until I really dug into it and started finding all this other corroborating evidence.
Danny here has, let me put it up here. Oh, let me click on the right one. How far south have these reports been? He said, myself, I've never heard of a smaller cryptid. Before you answer that, Danny, all you have to do is look up Orang Pendek, and you'll find, probably one of the most well-known smaller cryptid. I mean, that thing averages, I think, between 4 to 5.5, something like that, feet tall. So yeah. So I'm sorry, I'll let you go ahead and finish the rest of it.
Actually, I don't know if it's the Red River Gorge, but that's in West Virginia, correct?
The what?
The Red River Gorge.
New River Gorge.
Okay, New River Gorge.
New River.
Is there? Okay, then maybe because I want to say it's like the Red River. I thought it was in Kentucky. I wish I'd have wrote this down, but years ago I ran across an article. Maybe it was on Mysterious Universe or something like that, where somebody reported seeing they were whitewater rafting or canoeing or something on the river, and they reported, I know it was either Kentucky or West Virginia, where they reported seeing like 4 or 5 of these smaller red hair colored, what they described as little hairy hominids, 3 to 4 feet tall, on the banks of the river.
Nice.
So and then Mark Muncy from if you're familiar with him from the Erie, Florida, and all that stuff. I was talking to him, and he told me that he had heard of several people's encounters in Florida where they called them stump jumpers down there.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, he said that down there they call them stump jumpers, and they're like these little smaller 3 to 4 foot tall hairy hominids.
I'm sorry, I'm answering somebody. Jake.
Oh, absolutely, sorry. It's okay.
Okay, I know sometimes I get, I'm trying to keep up with everybody. Yeah, I've heard that, and I was telling you the other day when we talked prior to the interview here. Nancy said the Red River Gorge is in Kentucky.
That's what it is. So it's the Red River Gorge is where that one was. Okay.
I've only taken one report that says it was something smaller. I mean, people talk about some other that's not. When I mean smaller, I mean like 4 feet, somewhere in there. I've had people tell me about like 5 feet, 6 feet. But yeah, it was not last year. Okay, it was last year. So it would have been 23. So it had been in 22. It'd been November of 22. this gentleman had a sighting near Elkins, West Virginia.
I know exactly where that is.
He was hunting where now when you go there, you'll see the turbines, the windmills.
Okay.
He was below that, and he was on the right of way. Him and his dad have a lease property right up on this ridge, and he was sitting in his tree stand, or I think he said tree stand. Pretty sure he said tree stand. And he hears this jabbering noise, like you couldn't tell what it was. So he thought, oh, maybe somebody was there. Then he started hearing this clacking noise. And he said immediately, I knew what the clacking noise was. He said, I knew it was a bear clacking his jaws, snapping his jaws. And he said, then he hears some rustling in the brush, and he said the bear pops out on the right of way. And he said it looks like it was not startled, but nervous, looking around and whatnot. So something was there, I guess. And he said, well, I figure it's just somebody else. And he goes, once the bear went off, he said, well, if the bear's acting that way, the deer are on to whoever. And he said, I'm not gonna see or get a deer probably.
Right.
So he gets down out of his tree stand. He goes, starts to walk down the right of way, and he's heading toward the area where his dad had his tree stand. And he said about 50 to 75 yards away, he sees a peculiar stump looking thing. Like he said, it just was odd. He thought it was a stump at first, standing on the edge of the right of way, or not standing. He first, if it's a stump, it's not standing. But he thought it was a stump at first, on the edge of the right of way, and then he realized it's not a stump. This thing, whatever this is something standing there, and it turns and looks at him. And he, at the same time, he's trying to get his phone out to take a picture. Well, this thing, he said, was only about like 4 foot tall, somewhere in there, 4.5 feet at the most, 2 to 2.5 feet wide, which, in my opinion, half as wide as you are tall,
that's pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it fits like your description of something being bulky and pretty good size. He said it was darkish color, all over, except when this thing turned to facing the chest part, like from the chest down, he said almost to the groin area. He said it almost went tapered down, was a completely different color, like a lighter brownish color. And I asked him, I said, do you think that maybe was thinner hair on this, and his skin was showing through? He said, no, absolutely not. This thing had different color hair. And and so I thought that was rather interesting, because I've only had one other report, two reports. One, you mentioned Brendel earlier. This guy called it patchwork. He said almost like patchwork,
right.
but it was much larger. The other one I took that had different color hair on its body was much larger, 7.5 feet tall, but had lighter color on the bottoms. And I just thought that was interesting when you were talking about, when we talked earlier, how you were talking this thing had some size to it, some bulk to it, and only being 3.5, 4 foot tall. So yeah, I think, well, that kind of matches what this gentleman was telling me about. And eventually I'm going to get to where he had his sighting last June. I had a sighting of something. I'm not sure what it is yet. I still don't know what it is. Driving up 33 going toward Elkins, I looked down the river, something standing, other folks know the story, but there was something standing on a rock, and it was rather large. But from my, I guess you say the where I had my sighting, not where I was at, but where this creature was at, or possible creature, was less than 3 miles, like 2.5 miles from where he had his sighting. So So I thought it was pretty cool.
Well, and the thing is like, mathematically speaking, like, it's going to be way easier for a small creature to stay hidden and get enough food than it is for a larger one. So I mean, the possibility these smaller things could exist, I think, is definitely there.
Right. I'm looking to see if we got any questions for you real quick.
Okay.
I think these are just guys talking back and forth.
Okay.
About something here.
Go ahead.
Okay. What was I going to ask you again? Okay. You mentioned that you had a love. We'll close the show out here with just a couple of questions I have for you.
No problem.
You mentioned you had the love of UFO sightings.
Yeah.
First off, um, being that close to Wright-Patterson, have you ever had your own experience, and or do you hear a lot of stories from that area?
I personally have never seen anything. It's like I tell people, it's like if I was making this up and I wanted attention, I'd have told people I saw a black triangle, and
Okay.
people would be like, "Oh, where do you live at?" Like, "Oh, you live next to Right Pat." Like midget Bigfoots were not on my bingo card. It's just I'm like, never in my life did I think that I'd be chasing midget Bigfoots, or at 43 years old. But no, it's funny. I personally have never seen anything. A few years back, there was a UFO report that you can go on YouTube and you can Google, like, if you put in a UFO over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There was one. It made our local news. There was a video of it, and it's weird because it was like one of the I don't know if it was the gimbal. It was one of the Navy. It was like changing shapes.
Hmm.
So like it was like it was shifting shapes and colors as it was hovering in the air there, on the video. And I personally didn't see it, but I watched the video that was on the news. And there was a local news reporter. His name was Carl Day, years ago. That I think that video is on YouTube as well. But he had a dentist gave him a cast of a lower jaw that this dentist said he worked out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that came from um, an extraterrestrial being that was at the base, a body they'd taken there. So
Wow.
Carl Day, at one time a well-known local news reporter in the area, was in possession of this. And I believe if you dig on YouTube, I've seen the video myself. It's been a few years, of him holding this cast and showing it on camera of what looks to be this small, weirdly shaped jaw and whatnot. That's probably one of the better ones I've heard. Um, you know, my cousin did HVAC out at Wright Pat, and he's like, man, there's all kinds of underground stuff. Like, you go down there and you make a wrong turn and there's guards, like, turn around, go back the other way. He goes, there is so much that you don't see on the surface underneath. But I've got a lot of secondhand stories where I remember one time when I was a kid, my stepdad, my mom, and then my stepdad were all sitting at the kitchen table. And it was one of those things where, like, hey, go away. This is grown up talk. And I'm like, I go around the corner and I'm listening anyway. And
Right.
my step grandpa's telling them about, I don't know if it was him or if it was somebody he worked with, because he was a concrete worker, but he was talking about how back in the day, they would go do concrete work at Wright Pat, and they seen all these things like in test tubes and formaldehyde and all these weird things that they weren't supposed to be seeing. There's a lot of secondhand stories like that. If you drive around Wright Pat, it's one of those things where you see the vents from underground. So they've definitely got, like, you can see the ventilation smoke coming up. And so there's definitely, and it's funny. I don't know. I don't know if any of you guys watch Beyond Skinwalker Ranch or Skinwalker Ranch or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
On the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, their first season, they were at a ranch and they did some LiDAR stuff where this tunnel ran underneath this guy's property, and it ran to a cement factory. And it's funny because Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is surrounded by gravel pits and cement companies. And I thought to myself, well, if you were moving stuff in and out and building tunnels underground, like, I mean, nobody's going to let somebody open a concrete plant and dig next to their, military base unless they're contracted by the government, right?
Right.
So just kind of, there's a lot of odd little, like I said, there's a lot of second and third hand accounts where, like, somebody's grandpa, my wife's got a good one where she was at a yard sale, and an elderly woman came up, and there was a VHS cassette of the movie Signs.
Mhm.
And this elderly lady was like, yeah, I used to be a secretary at Wright Pat, and I had to dictate this memo and from the colonel or whatever at the time, and it talked about having UFOs and alien bodies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So, like, you get a lot of second and third hand accounts like that
Right.
from around here.
Well, this is going to be kind of a, I guess, a controversial question here.
Go for it.
Since you're that close to the Air Force Base or the base, I know you probably don't want men in black knocking on your door, I guess. Do you feel that maybe a connection with what is going on in your area with these little creatures and the base, or maybe?
I've thought about that, um, but like I don't know. It's hard to connect the two.
Okay.
So I just I don't know. I mean, it'd be crazy if there were a bunch of midget Bigfoots that escaped right pattern. I mean, that would just make it even more insane sounding. But you know, I always mention that because like it's something that's noteworthy. You
Yeah.
can't rule anything out, but like when you get on some of these sites or like I said, the Bigfoot Mapping Project, and you look at where any of the Bigfoot sightings are around, they're always around streams and waterways and
Hmm.
rivers. So it's almost like they're traveling up and down those, like they're transitory or migratory. Um, but you know, you, you read several anecdotal, I can't say that word, anecdotal
Yeah.
accounts over the years where, you know, guys who worked at military bases are like, hey, look, if you see this, don't shoot it. It's just part of the natural wildlife, whether it's Bigfoot, whether, you know, you get several of those have come up over the years, and podcasts I've listened to, articles I've read, things like that, that, you know, hey, I was stationed at this base and we were told like, hey, look, if you see something that looks like a Bigfoot, don't shoot it. You know, I mean, so
Right.
it might just be a happy accident that this is going on next door.
Right. As far now, we'll go back to the encounters real quick, and like I said, I'll just close out with a couple questions I had. Um, Similarities between the sightings, not necessarily the area, but uh, the description. How much similarity are between is there between all these sightings between one and the other?
um, Very, very close. Like the one that was in Tip City, it said the kid described it as tall as his 10-year-old sister, had a pointed head. That is kind of like that's kind of what I saw. And it like they describe it as like a small Bigfoot is how most of these witnesses are describing what they're seeing. And a lot of, like I said, the the father and son that saw the pair in Springfield, I mean, they're like, hey, look, you know, let's hunker down here and wait because there's got to be a big one. Like nobody's gonna let two kids, you know, nobody's gonna let two juvenile Bigfoot run around not be a big one. So, but they never saw a big one. So it's one of those things where, you know, they look they look very similar, but you know, without using Harry and the Hendersons or, you know, a Jack Link's reference, you know, it's like who really knows what a big one looks like, you know? So it's just one
Right.
of those things where it's like, you know, you see a small upright walking, you know, 3.5 to 4 foot tall, 4.5 feet tall hominid, and that the first thing you think is that, well, that's got to be, you know, a small one, you know, or juvenile, or and I don't rule out the possibility that that's what those are. Um, I always say I don't like to marry myself to ideas at all, and I'm actually not a big proponent of these 8 to 10 foot tall Bigfoots. There's something I've taken to calling the myth of the 6 foot man. You know, everybody's seen that picture of the 8 foot tall Bigfoot, the 6 foot gorilla, and the 6 foot man
Mm.
next to him. The average male in the United States is 5 feet 9 inches tall, and the average female is 5 feet 4 inches tall.
Hmm.
Um, so 86% of men in the United States are under 6 feet tall. Only 14% of the men in the US are 6 feet tall or taller, and only 1% are 6 feet 4 or taller. Um, so, like, I know there's a lot of argument over Patty, whether which lens they use. Like, you know, Patty could be 6'4", 6'5", or is Patty 7'4"? Well, you know,
Right.
a female Bigfoot at 6'4", 6'5", and you know, 400 or 500 pounds is still a full foot taller than a human female, and a 7 foot male Bigfoot is still well over a foot tall than a, you know, adult human male. So, you know, people out of adrenaline and out of a flight response tend to, you know, your body makes threats bigger when you see them. So I don't fault anybody for saying this thing was 8 feet tall when maybe it was only 7, or, you know, it was 7 feet tall and it was 6.5. I mean, there's got to be some leadway there for the differences in sizes of these creatures and whatnot. So That's kind of where, I mean, I think even in your book that I read, you seem to get a lot in between that 6 and 7 range.
Yeah. Yeah. I have not taken many reports of them being like 9, 10, 12, like you hear some people say. Um,
Well,
I mean, I'm not saying that's not a possibility. I'm just saying I
well,
haven't taken it. And I think a lot of those, when they're described as being that big, you know, your adrenaline will make make
right.
things much larger than what they normally are. So yeah, I don't. To me, if they are that big, or if there are some that big, uh, they should even 8. You know,
That's
they're gonna
huge.
leave a mark. You know, they're gonna leave a
Right.
mark somewhere. So yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I like to compare them to black bears because that's what everybody does.
Yeah,
Like, hey, you saw a black bear. Well, if you look at like you go to the Smoky Mountains, black bear, 250, 300 pounds is your average black bear. But
right.
you go to a place like Newfoundland, their bears there are 5, 6, 700 pounds because
Right.
they eat primarily salmon. They're more carnivorous and they're less omnivorous. So it
Yeah.
would make sense if you had a Bigfoot in the Midwest that's eating corn, it's eating berries, and it's eating less protein, that it's not as big. So you can kind of use bears as a correlation there. Like, the bears in the Smoky Mountains are, they're scavengers, they're trash pickers, they eat they're more omnivorous, more, eat more vegetation. And then the black bears, and like I said, Newfoundland are, guys routinely get out there to trophy bear hunt because they
Yeah.
feed on salmon and they're 5, 6, 700 pounds. So,
Yeah.
the Olympic Peninsula would be a place that has huge salmon runs where is more likely to produce a 7 to 8 footers than
Yeah.
maybe here in the Midwest that are, I would say are 6 to 7.
Right. Okay. Another question I want to ask you.
Absolutely.
Was 93? I mean, I know you're citing, but you also had that other guy come forward on from the
Yes.
show. Was that the earliest report you had?
Yes. Those are the earliest 2 that I've got so far.
Okay. What as far as historical records, I mean, have you looked into like newspaper articles, like look into the wild man stories and see if there's any of those in your area and any descriptions of what they might have been?
I've looked. I have not come across any of the ones that are smaller yet.
Okay.
I
So
did
this,
come across from a friend of mine, his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend's dad. I talked to him, and he actually had something that sounded a little bit like a frogman back in the 70s, not far from here.
awesome. I just want to put this up here. I don't know if you can see the comments or not. Danny says, Jake, you're awesome, buddy. Quite full of very, very interesting information.
Thank you. Oh, and I did want to mention, I had the honor and great fortune of co-emceeing Encounter Quest in North Carolina this past April. And I got to spend a lot of time with Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and I showed him my tracks. And he looked at them, and he took his time, and he's like, you know what? He said, I think you have something there. He found them interesting, and he said that they appear to be consistent with what he has seen in his collection and what he's evaluated. So he thinks there may be something with those to those tracks. I also want to say that after I found those tracks, I spent like 2 hours at Cabela's and looked at every shoe, boot.
Right.
I mean, even those Vibram 5-finger shoes that people wear have tread pattern on the bottom. I mean, I could not find anything that could have possibly have made those tracks that would be a shoe. And Dr. Meldrum's told me that less than 1% of the human population has a 13-inch long foot.
Right. Yeah. The first track I ever found, and I casted it. Actually, it's this one right here. I don't know if you can see it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's hard to see right there. You can see
Yep.
It's 13 and a half. And well, it's not coming across on the camera, but it's 13 and a half and 5.5 or 6 inches wide at the widest part.
Yep.
And when people think 13 inches, that's not very big, but I wear a size 12 shoe, sometimes 13, depending on what it is. And my foot's nowhere near 13 inches long.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah,
I wear a size 11, and my foot, if I measure it with the tape measure ruler, it's 10 and 3/4, 10 and 7/8. I mean, I have my mom being from West, that woman never wore shoes. Like she drove a car. she'd take her shoes off, and she was flat-footed. But I mean, I know what bare human footprints look like, and you can always tell the difference. And I mean, just from growing up with my mother, and I mean, God love her. I mean, she's 5'1", 120 pounds, tiny lady, but yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with, I know what footprints look like, human footprints look like. The arch is generally discernible, just the kind of pattern. You don't get that, that flat-footedness that appears in a lot of those Bigfoot type tracks, or that mid-tarsal break and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also had people say, they could be bear prints. They can be prints. And what a lot of people don't realize, bear prints are kind of easy to discern as well. Most people don't realize, the bear's big toe is on the outside. That's not on the inside.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yep.
Yep. So for folks that are out there looking and say, "Oh, it's a bear print," see where the big toe is, because the bears are on the outside. Well, Jake, it's been an awesome time. Everybody seems like they've, don't have any questions right now. But yeah, it's been a great talk, man. Like Danny said there,
absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Les.
Full of information, definitely. Been fun, real fun. And I appreciate you coming on, and appreciate
absolutely anytime, brother.
I'd like to talk to more about the smaller stuff, because I've had an interest in it. These smaller creatures. I don't know if some of them are Bigfoot related, or maybe there's some kind of a small hominid. I mean, because you hear right. some lore in some areas of small people, small hominids, I guess you'd say, and
yeah.
I'm just curious whether there's any connection there. I like to see if they're somehow.
Yeah. It's funny. At Monster Fest, Jason Hewlett, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a paranormal investigator out of British Columbia, but he just did a Ogopogo documentary with Eli Watson,
right?
And for Small Town Monsters. And I was talking to him at Monster Fest, and he came up and he told me when he was younger, him and his buddy were out, messing around in the woods and stuff, and they came across an area that was like it looked like somebody dug out the ground about 3 foot long and made like this 3 foot tall, like lean-to. And then they never saw, like, they didn't, find any tracks or anything, but he came up to me and told me, he was like, Ken Gerhardt said I should talk to you about that and tell you about, but yeah, he kind of had this thing. It seemed like a little person was sleeping in this little miniature lean-to. And one other thing that I found very interesting was they did a survey at Lake Ogopogo. They surveyed 1,000 people, and only 80 people out of 1,000 said if they saw something weird, they would report it to somebody, whether that was a wildlife official, police, 911, a podcaster.
Right.
So 8% of the people are reporting stuff. So that means, for every 11 sightings that people have, one person is saying something to somebody. So
right.
Yeah, I'm always that guy tenacious of. Especially if I can get a few beers in somebody, hey, you seen something weird? Got anything you want to talk about? I'm always trying to drag it out of them.
Yeah, and you always hear people like, no, I've never had anything, I never seen anything, or never did. And then after you talk to them for a little while, then they always say, but there was this one time.
Yep.
It seems like it always comes around to that. So.
Yep.
It's always good to get some people to talk. I mean, I enjoy
absolutely.
it. I enjoy that. That's the part I like, is talking to people and just hearing their experiences and seeing their face, or seeing or their, I don't know if I want to say emotions, but seeing how excited they can get sometimes because somebody's listening to them. Because there are those out there like, I don't want to talk because you're just I'm gonna be made fun of.
Yeah,
but it's always cool.
Yeah, and I understand that, especially if you're just, if you were one of those kids in high school that were picked on or try to keep your head down, and you finally made it into the real world where you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. The last thing you want to do is say, hey, I saw something crazy, and then everybody's back to making fun of you again. I mean, that's kind of why I come on and do these things. Like, I tell anybody, if you've seen something, even if you don't want me to mention it to anybody else, like, reach out. I'll listen. I'll take any of your reports, whether it's Bigfoot, UFOs. I mean, ghosts aren't really my thing. I think there's a phenomenon there. I don't know what it is. But yeah, I'll listen to anybody, and that's kind of my thing. Like, people are a lot of people take a lot of stories with them when they go, and there's a lot of knowledge that's lost out there. And I'd like for people to come forward and put that out there. And if we had more of it, we may get a little bit closer.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Well, again, it's been fun. We're closing on an hour and a half, I think. Yep, hour and 25 minutes. But hey, it's been fun. It's been fun. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
I could go on all night, but
yeah. I'm the same way. I can go on forever with any of this subject matter. I mean, I've been into it pretty deep the last few years, so I'm right there with you, brother.
Yep, I'm same way. But I know both of us have to get up. We're working, man. So that morning comes quick.
Yeah, 4:30 does come fast, so.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna put you in the background here real quick, and I'll shut everything or close everything up, and I'll be with you in a minute. Okay.
All right, sounds good, Les.
All right, all right, folks. That was awesome. Jake's awesome. A lot of good information there. It's refreshing to hear some new stuff. You always hear the typical, oh, they're this big, they're that big, they're 8 foot tall or 7 foot tall. They live in the woods, they're this deep. It's awesome to hear, like I said, the difference or some different stuff. Living in a residential area, seeing these things in a residential area, 3.5, 4 feet tall. Are they the same thing? Are they connected? Are they maybe a different type or species, or are they something completely different? I don't know. But it's pretty awesome that Jake has collected these reports. To me, that's I don't know anybody else is doing that. Everybody's out there seeking the grand monster, I guess you'd say, the big one. But I find it so neat that he's actually doing that. And I want to thank everybody again that's come by. And I'm trying to get to the end of here. Okay. I want to thank everybody that's come and watched the show. Everybody that's subscribed to the channel here recently. It's been humbling, I guess you'd say. I didn't realize that so many people have enjoyed watching not only the lives here, but the other videos. You may get a lot of comments lately. I've seen a few comments or a few people in the comments tonight talking about some other videos I've done with the giants and stuff like that. That's one of my favorite things to do. I wish I could dig more into that. But yeah, it's been a great night. Everybody, have a great evening and have a great weekend. Whatever you want to get into, get out there, have some fun and enjoy it. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye.